So Bryn is a real triple threat. He's got his PhD in astrophysics in 2019. He hosts Sci Curious, which is a podcast highlighting LGBTQ people in STEM and which explores the queer side of science. And he's the producer of Science is a Drag, a live stream extravaganza show featuring drag, cabaret, and the queer side of STEM. Brynley, the virtual stage is yours.
Hello. Hopefully you can see that okay. I don't know if I can make it full screen, because I don't know how to work any software, because I am a big old dum-dum. Here we go. Start from first slide. Can you all see the slideshow?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Hi. Thank you for the introduction, Mate. I am Dr. Brynley Pearlstone. I am a triple threat. I'm an astrophysicist by training. We'll get to that in a minute. I'm a science communicator by practice, which we'll also get to in a minute. And I'm quite adorable. I think you'll agree. A little bit about me. I'm gay and non-binary. I came out as gay at about 20 years old after I left home and gone to university. I am disabled. I have a couple of disabilities, including vision and some impairments in my right arm. And I'm a huge fan of things like podcasts and anime and drag race. So if you, Sam said that he was highlighting particularly the LGBTQ community. If Sam was highlighting it, I'm about to go full Farah moan on the LGBT community, just a face full of highlighter. So strap in and start your engines. Bit of an academic background about myself. I had studied my undergraduate for a master's in physics in Swansea University. Went to university in 2009 and graduated in 2013. Actually, not quite true. I went to university in 2008, did a year in Surrey, just outside London, and spent the whole year not going to class and dropped out, and the university wouldn't have me back. So I had to rearrange, had to go out of the entire country and go to South Wales. But I ended up graduating with a first class master's degree, which ain't half bad. So in 2014, which is now 6.5 years ago, I moved up here to Glasgow to study my PhD at the University of Glasgow. My PhD was on gravitational waves and neutron stars. I worked with the LIGO collaboration, who you might have heard of, doing mostly data analysis, looking for possible signals from far off, dense, spinny things. That was a roller coaster. I got to go around the world. I won some really cool prizes, including some like international accolades for my involvement, but not for me, for the LIGO of it all. My focus was on Bayesian statistics, and I have since not looked at it because some of the downs of the ups and downs were associated with the research of it all. Like the other two have mentioned, it can be really quite isolating to be doing research, and I'm sure, as we all know, sat at home, not in the labs, not socialising, PhDs can be very isolating. And I'm an extrovert, I'm an outgoing person, so I really didn't necessarily feel at home doing this. So I tended to use science communication to get away from the research. I started science communication by going to schools in the local area. I remember one of my first outreach events was Women in Science Day, because, womana, not, but there's very few women in physics. So they had to throw a gay in that direction instead. I went to Women in Science Day at a local secondary school, and kind of got hooked. Since then, during my PhD, I was doing things like Bright Club, which is a 5-minute stand-up comedy set on stage at the Stand in Glasgow, which once you've done that, nothing will scare you, I promise you. And even some independent projects that came out of nowhere during my PhD. But PhDs are only for a short amount of time, and in 2019, in January, I submitted my thesis. I had a plan, I was sitting on this plan, and as soon as I submitted my thesis, I put in an application to the Institute of Physics in Scotland for a grant to start my own project and dive straight in. I didn't want to carry on in academia. My mental health was, a mess after doing a PhD, and I didn't necessarily have the greatest time closing out either. I didn't have a good relationship with the staff, and so I decided I didn't want to carry on with that. That was not for me. I also wasn't really sure what I did want to do, but I did know that I wanted to be PsyCom. So I thought I'm going to start doing what I want to do and see if someone will pay me to do it, and put my toe into the water of being a freelance science communicator. I also had an audience in mind. Sam and Kirsty both have talked about how they engage with the public in different ways and which kinds of public they engage with. For Kirsty, it seemed like it was very much, here's the project, who's the public, who's my audience. For Sam, it's very much, by the sounds of it, a very general public and tailoring the content towards them. For me, I had in mind from the very jump that I wanted to cater towards a very niche part of the general public. I wanted to produce science communication that highlighted for and showcased the work of LGBTQ people. So get your gays and your trans folks and your non-binaries and your lesbians and everyone, get them all out there in the open for the world to see. So that was the direction I wanted to follow in, and I made a good go at it. I launched PsyCurious podcast, which is, as stated, the podcast that highlights LGBTQ people in STEM and gets to know the cool, weird side of science. I'm the host, Dr. Brynley Pearlstone, and I'm a triple threat. That was going reasonably well. In June of 2019, I hosted a live show at the Glasgow Science Festival, and I've done a couple of live shows since, and it's still going, even if it's on a little bit of hiatus at the moment, because who wants to be doing anything, honestly, right now? And after about a year of doing this, I was starting to find my footing, and I was offered a job at the Edinburgh Science Festival in early March of 2020. You can see where this is going, can't you? That fell apart because of lockdown, and that was tough. But being freelance and being independent, I was able to pivot quite quickly. I had my niche, I had my audience, and I had some ideas for the future. And so PsyCurious is something that I can do online, using Zoom to record podcasts and putting them out online. That's all online anyway, I don't need people. I had an idea that I was going to do with Sam Langford from the Global Science Show and Carla Suchu from the Glasgow Science Centre, called Science is a Drag, where we take drag and we take science and we smash them together, and the plan was to do this big cabaret show down in the Polo Lounge in Glasgow, which is, I think, the biggest gay bar in Scotland. I might be wrong on that, don't quote me. But of course, lockdown happened, and this Science is a Drag in Polo didn't. Instead, we moved it online, and we've now done 2 Science is a Drag live streams featuring people like the Glasgow drag legend known as... Oh, excuse me, I've just forgotten her name. That's really bad. Rue Jazzle, that's her name. As well as comedians, Trevor Slaughter, previously of Bright Club. We've had Scary Boots, who's a science communicator from South in England. And we've got another one coming up in March, but that's not what this is about. I've also, more recently, engaged in a project called Knit the Universe with IOP Scotland. The idea is to get kids and their grandparents and their parents and their families all knitting together. We take images of space science, pixelate them into a 20 by 20 image, which is then of sorts a knitting pattern, and then distribute these all around Scotland for families to come together and knit together. And like I say, it's a whole new kind of spacecraft. It's not all plain sailing. We've heard from the other 2 that there can be all kinds of feelings, both negative and positive, around science communication. I've been reasonably lucky in that I've had a support network of other science communicators, of friends and family who've kept me going through all this, but not everyone will have that. Coming straight out of university and diving 2 feet first into science communication, imposter syndrome was real. I was starting to get grants from proposals I'd been putting in, and I would think to myself, this can't be right. I'm nobody. I'm some bloke with a PhD, and there's 1,000 of them out there, and my ideas aren't even that good. Why am I getting these grants? Added to that, sometimes the entire field can feel overcrowded. Since I've been doing LGBTQ science communication stuff, I've noticed that there's a whole bunch more people in the field who are LGBTQ, but also who cater for LGBTQ science and LGBTQ audiences. And that can make it feel like it's kind of like crowded and competitive, which leads to opportunities being competitive. Funding is limited. There are only a handful of grants that go out at any given time. Jobs can be hard to come by. And that all is sort of a feedback loop in itself. You add to that that science communication itself can be difficult. Kirsty said it's not all talking to kids. I wouldn't know where to start when talking to a kid. That's not my forte. Even talking to adults, it can be really, really hard to work out what is the bit of information that they need to hear in order to get something to click or to hold their interest. Added to that we live in a late stage capitalist hellhole where everything is worth money, but nothing is worth the amount of money it should be worth. And you are worth less than you should be, but you're also worth more than you should be. No one can work out how much time is worth. And now the world is ending, and I'm going to move slide before I have a depression. But it can be, it's not a plain sailing, but as long as you've got a goal in mind and you've got some guidance and some resilience, you can carry through it. All that is a big issue, the stuff from the last slide. It's not to be diminished, but as long as you are present, you are there for conversations, you're online, you're in the room, and you are engaging, because your voice is valuable. Everybody's voice is valuable. Be visible. This is something that I strongly believe that there is no such thing as subtlety. Subtlety doesn't work. I'm subtle like a brick. I don't know if you can tell from the slides, but or that thing, but rainbows are all over everything I do. Because subtlety's for losers. Whenever I'm doing an event, I want to avoid barriers to participation, however that might be. So for SciCurious, it's a free audio release that you can get on an RSS feed. With Science is a Drag, we ask attendees to pay what they can. That could be from £1 up to however much they think it's worth. And Knit the Universe is a free PDF download. Not everything will be perfectly accessible to everybody, and you have to sort of assess the impacts of what you're doing on a case-by-case basis. For me, it was really important to present a diverse and vibrant group that is LGBT in STEM. And that comes through in, I think, the podcast. The goal is not for me to wax lyrical and just say, I'm Bryn and these are my ideas, but to highlight others, to bring them in and build a choir of voices into the conversation of LGBT and STEM. For me, that's what was important in my science communication. You might have other guiding principles that are going to sort of stick with you, and it's really important to hold them close. And that ties straight into the fifth bullet point there: listen and amplify the voices of individuals in the community. Not a single voice. A single voice has volume, but a bunch of voices together, or a single voice being rebounded and echoed back and forth, carries a lot more weight. So that's what guided me through rough periods. Just remembering those 5 things: be present, be visible, avoid barriers, present it as it is, and listen and amplify. So what does this all mean? What can I tell you? So here's my Bryn-approved advice. Find your niche. It might be, like me, you've got a niche audience. Perhaps you've got a very niche way of delivering content, or a very niche content that you want to deliver. Whatever it is, find with it and really massage that niche until you're able to deliver to it effectively. Make your own opportunities. It can feel crowded. It can feel opportunity sparse sometimes, but that doesn't have to be the case. There are plenty of grants out there. There's plenty of online activities out there. And if there's not something for you, go ahead and make your own. barge open the door on Twitter and say, hey, no one's doing this thing and I want to do it. So sit down and shut up and buy a ticket. Because maybe not with that tone. Maybe that tone's a bit much. But you need to bring this can-do energy really into what you do if you want to clear the way for yourself. It's important to step out of your comfort zone as well. I came into science communication fresh out of a PhD with no network, no formal training, no idea of who or what I wanted to do, just that I wanted to do something for the gays, right? And since then I have delivered at the Glasgow Science Festival at the Science Centre with Psycurious as well. I have started, over last summer, I was doing some networking and seminar series. I helped organise a STEM Village conference in Glasgow online end of last year. And so really pushing your own boundaries, you'd be surprised at what you can do. And network. This was the most important thing that I did, was network. Whether it's at SciComm socials, which are now online, events like this, where you could be talking with people in the comments and swapping email addresses. Get out there and get to know some people. Allow yourself some successes. Through stepping out of my comfort zone, I've managed to grow my portfolio from nothing to a bunch, right? But only by looking back and saying, actually, that went really well. There was in the Psycurious Live in 2019, I hired a drag queen to come and be on a discussion panel. That drag queen is now slaying it on RuPaul's Drag Race UK. I'm not saying I set her up for success. Okay, I am saying I set her up for success. But you have to remember to be brave and confident. You can reflect on your successes, you step out your comfort zone, but always do it with, I might be a bit scared, but I can do this. I've got this. We all here are reasonably well-educated people. We have a head on our shoulders. So we can battle any barriers and bash back any obstacles that come our way. You got this, trust me. You're more competent than you might think. So that's all well and good, but where am I now? What am I doing? I'm not actually doing SciComm full-time anymore. Now I'm working as a graduate placement with the Glasgow Centre for Inclusive Living, which is an organisation run by and for people with disabilities. And they are a graduate scheme that get people into the NHS in and around Glasgow. So I'm based in a hospital in Clydebank called the Golden Jubilee. And out there, what I do is some diversity and inclusion work. I'm currently setting up some staff networks, developing and delivering some training, and doing some statistical modelling. So this is all building on the stuff that I was doing, not only in my PhD, but primarily the stuff that I was doing with science communication. Developing and delivering training is something that I've got experience with, thanks to SciComm. And D&I work, diversity and inclusion, is right in my wheelhouse because of Psycurious. I'm still doing SciComm and a bit of LGBT activism on the side as well. So coming up, we've got a Science as a Drag show for British Science Week in March next month. We've also put in a bid for Edinburgh Science Festival. Really want Science as a Drag to be able to play the presence. Play the pleasance. Bye, Kirsty. Knit the Universe is ongoing. You can search Knit the Universe or go to knittheuniverse.co.uk and download some knitting patterns. The STEM Village is still ongoing. There's an LGBT History Month quiz at the end of the month, and we've got some big announcements coming in the pipeline. There's even more podcasts in the editing queue, and now I'm doing a full-time job. Remember, be gay, do SciComm. Thanks. And then I will leave the rest for questions, I guess.
That was absolutely excellent. Thank you very much, Bryn. I really enjoyed it. I just love the pure, unapologetic energy of what you do. That's just, it's pure bliss. It's absolutely amazing. Oh, yeah, that's so good. So, I just feel like there's an echoing message going through all the talks, which is essentially, if you want to do something, kind of just go and ask for it. And this was mentioned many times before. And I think this is like a key concept. Like, don't wait for the opportunity to come to you. Do something yourself and approach it on your own. And just magic can happen if you do that. So One of the things I was thinking, did you have any mentors before you went fully into science communications?
Yeah. So before I went all the way in, I asked someone at the University of Glasgow for advice. That somebody was Zara Gladman, who was at the time working with the Glasgow Science Festival. She's since changed roles, and now she's head of, I think she's head of public engagement, Glasgow University. But she helped me put together the grant application for Psycurious, and really solidified some of these core questions that you should be asking yourself when you're developing a project, like who is it for, what's it going to cost, all these things that after a bit of time in SciComm come naturally, but really if you're starting to do some SciComm projects for yourself, you might not have thought about.
Right. There's a question coming from the audience. You have a lot on your plate. How do you divide your time? Or just where do you get all of that amazing energy? I'm asking the same thing. It's just, how do you do that?
So my master's thesis was on the path of two photons in different spacetimes, and through them, a particular spacetime being gravitational waves, and the sort of result of that is that one photon sees another photon going in a closed causal loop. My master's degree was in time travel. This is how I had time. I sort of, no, okay, but really, the way that I do a lot of this stuff is slowly. I'm not a man who does things quickly. I take my time and do them at my own pace. But also, on the topic of don't ask, don't get, I'm working with a couple of people on Science as a Drag. And since starting this full-time job, which was only in December, so it's still reasonably new, since starting this full-time job, I've started to delegate more of the work onto them. I'm still present for it. I still do some of the work, but not all of it anymore. You've probably picked up that a lot of SciComm, certainly through Kirsty's talk and through Sam's talk, isn't necessarily one project at a time, but kind of juggling a whole bunch of balls, keeping a lot in the air at any given go. And so time management becomes a key skill that you really have to develop. And it can be hard to know if you're doing that well, but questions like, you've got a lot on your plate, how do you manage, are a good boost, so thank you.
Amazing. There's also a question coming. Essentially, what gave you the confidence to make the big jump into science communications? Because it seems like quite a scary thing to do.
Literally nothing. Delusion, poor mental health, and if anybody can do it, why can't I do it? I'm somebody, right? I'm anybody. I can be anybody. And if anyone can do it, I can do it. There's nothing out there that wasn't made by either a person or a team of persons. Even big blockbuster films are just people with talent and money, right? So even if you don't have the money, you might be a person with talent and you don't know till you try.
Right. It kind of feels to me that one of the things that would really help you in the case was that you have like a strong guiding principles. Like, when you gave all of these like bullet points, like go on a network, like just, slam the doors and say, here I am, that's what I do. Kind of like these clear guiding principles are something that I believe really can help to bring yourself out into the world. So I really like that. I was also thinking about if there are any like new science communication trends that have emerged recently, because obviously we are facing like global pandemic, like nothing really is as it should be. Has the field of science communications because obviously you had to change the way you do things because you're going to do things in person, blah, blah, blah. Any new trends, anything that's new in the field? I'd be quite curious.
Yeah, it was really interesting last March watching everyone scramble and panic and try and move online as quickly as they could. There was a lot of conversation about how grants were being a bit more forgiving with implementation of ideas because things had to move online very quickly, and how different grants might become more accessible to people because, now big teams are less viable. And so you're seeing a lot more accessibility of grants. I know that the IOP Scotland grant has gone from a review period of every few months to it's now just constantly open. And they're allowing freelance time to make up 2/3 of a grant now. which is a really positive move. This is work, and work should be paid, right? We do live in a late capitalism hellhole, but work still needs to be paid. So that's a really good trend that I'm seeing, that time is being more valued. Other than that, we're seeing a lot of grassroots sort of ground up SciComm come through. Things like the Global Science Show. That was just a bloke and an idea and a thing. That's Sam Langford, who I work with on Science is a Drag, just said, all right, I want to do this one day, and did it, right? So we're seeing an awful lot of that. It can just be you on Twitter. It could be you with a story that you tell through Instagram photos. Maybe it's on TikTok, but we're seeing an awful lot of individuals doing their own thing and doing some SciComm. There is a bit of a danger there, where if we have individuals who just want to go out there and do some SciComm, we need to be sure that if we're taking in some science information, that it comes from a reputable source. So if you want to go out and do this, please cite sources, have information available for further reading, because, you know, I could go on TikTok tomorrow and say, the earth is flat, I have a PhD, it's true! Don't believe me, but you could, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's still science communication, so it's a very good idea to stick to the science principles we use in the first hand. Yeah, and actually, you mentioned the question of finding your niche, and I think that makes lots of sense. So perhaps because you are in the field, or maybe also Sam can vouch here, is there any like group of people which is now perhaps like underrepresented in the science communications field? Because obviously what was mentioned before is that, like, you know, science communications, and people think, oh, you go to school and you know, show kids some experiments. That's the obvious first thing that pops in your mind. What is the non-obvious group of people which might also be targeted? Have any ideas?
BME, Black Minority Ethnic. There is very, very little representation of BME staff at any level of academia in any field in the UK. And as such, we tend to not get BME science communicators or people catering particularly to BME people. Mm-hmm. That's a huge one to me.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
The other one is disability comes to mind. Things that are accessible for people who have visual impairments or are hard of hearing or have motor impairments or neurodiversity. There's some stuff out there, but I think a lot of the stuff that happens in meat space in the real world could be assessed for inclusivity for disability a lot better than it has been.
I hear you. Makes sense. So there was an idea coming also from my colleagues that we already discussed plenty of times that Twitter is actually a super powerful platform. So if anybody here is using Twitter, please feel free to share your Twitter nickname in the chat, and we can just follow and network and, you know, just make the magic happen. So if there's no more questions coming from the audience, I guess we can wrap things up because we are right on time. Thank you so much to all the speakers. It was absolutely fabulous. I really enjoyed all the perspectives on the field of science communications. Thank you all. As you mentioned before, this has been recorded, so it will be available on YouTube. And also make sure to follow Scope, which is our student society, on Facebook and on Twitter, so you can keep up to date with our latest events. And thank you all for coming. I hope you had a good time. Thank you very much. So I'm just going to go and follow all of the Twitter handles from the chat.